The constructivist approach to lesson planning is a model that aims to put students at the center of the learning enterprise and create what we often refer to as spaces for learning, where students can construct meaning in the content that's being covered. This particular approach is very obviously, as you can see from the name, heavily rooted in constructivist theory, espoused by Piaget, Bruner, and others. And also takes into account multiple forms of representation espoused by Eisner and very prominently featured in Universal Design for Learning. As many of you know, constructivist thinking is built around this notion that we all have different background knowledge or schema in our brains, and we all, once exposed to content or different experiences or things of that nature, we individually make meaning differently based off of sort of our background lenses and knowledge, and we try to take that new information in and to fit it with what we already know as a sort of a puzzle. The constructivist approach features objectives we refer to as emergent understandings and are very similar to what you see in the measurable behavioral objectives with a slight twist. So these particular objectives, again, would use the ABC format. But what's unique here is because we do draw upon this model draws upon Eisner's multiple forms of representation, whereas that espouses that we can show what we know in different ways, right? So if we're learning things about, let's say we're learning about parallelism in writing, does everyone have to write an essay? Can someone, maybe do a cartoon or some other form of representing of that knowledge that doesn't necessarily have to be standardized or the same across all students in the classroom. So specific to the objective, the C would allow for, or the product that they are producing or putting together so that they can illustrate that they learned the behavior, the concept, can vary and will vary across students. So that might include multiple things, a menu perhaps. In the lesson plan itself, there are several constructivist formats that we highlight in the book. Those might include the Caudelet method. Many of music folks are familiar with the Moffat and Wagner method, the Critical Explorers method that's quite well known and put out by Duckworth and others. But we chose to focus on the EL Dr. C model, which is actually a specific model that came out of the quantum learning folks, and it's actually an acronym. So it stands for enroll, experience, label, demonstrate, review, and celebrate. So just very briefly, the enroll would aim to, very much like the anticipatory set, to draw the students into some sort of an experience that would create intrigue or would make them want to learn more about whatever the content was that was being covered. The experience looks at the kind of experience, goes a little bit deeper, building off of that enroll piece, and looks at what kind of experience can we create for students to have an initial exploration with the content. The label is where you see the most direct sort of instruction involvement on the part of the teacher. What happens here is this is where the teacher labels what had been done in the experience and in the enroll. So rather than saying today we are going to learn about parallelism, they would create some experiences with the students to sort of work through some of these different pieces and then come in and say, what you just did was identify 3 different types of parallels or something of that line. So that experience came first, then the label came in. At which point, then the teacher would go into looking at maybe some direct instruction around, in this instance, parallelism or other sorts of things. In the demonstration piece, this is where we start to look at what ways might students illustrate their understanding of the concept that has been covered and taught. So what kinds of, and this is where the teacher will look at creating those spaces, if you will, for students to grapple with the content. And then the review is very much like it sounds, where we look at, this is usually where, we're really hitting formative assessment hard here. And we're looking at, how can we formatively assess whether the students learned what we thought, that what we wanted them to learn, and tying that back to the B again. And then finally, the celebrate is sort of how we can wrap up the lesson and celebrate the learning in some form or fashion.